Hello and welcome to our usual live Friday webcast. My name is Creighton Jones, and joining me in the studio today are Jason Ross and, of course, Mr. Lyndon LaRouche. And today is August the 23rd, 2013. So we're going to get started right away with the questions. Our first question is an institutional question, which deals with the subject of Glass-Steagall. So our questioner asks, Mr. LaRouche, I would like to have your assessment of where the Glass-Steagall battle stands at this time. Congress returns to Washington in 2 weeks, and it is clear that Wall Street and the Obama economic team are in a state of panic over the growing support among the American people and within Congress for the breakup of the too-big-to-fail banks. The fight has already reached the point that Wall Street is deploying in its own name through big bank lobbyists, the American Bankers Association, and other fronts in an effort to put out the fires that are burning all over the country and increasingly around the world. You are one of a growing chorus of economists who are convinced that the entire financial system is on the verge of a major explosion. It also appears that the Obama economics team is also scrambling to install Larry Summers as the next chairman of the Fed. This is diverting attention and creating yet another brawl, with an enormous backlash building against the idea of the man who was pivotal in the takedown of Glass-Steagall being installed at the Fed. What do you see in the coming days and weeks as the shape of the battle?
Well, first of all, you have to realize that what people are forecasting is probably not true, not because they are trying to deceive you, but because they don't know what's coming either. Because the situation is such that intrinsically the banking system of the United States and the transatlantic as well is now headed for an early crash. We can, if you talk about timing by the end of this year, sometime in December or beginning of January, this whole thing is going to crash. And even those who are the big speculators, Wall Street types, and in London as well, but I think the London crowd is sometimes much more intelligent on this question than the Wall Street types. But the point is, what is going to happen is the debt of the United States and the debt also of the nations of Europe, who are a very similar situation, they cannot survive. The whole system is going to crash. It is not going to be who's going to win. It's who's going to lose what. So that there is no option. And these guys are very forecasters. The only thing, they've been spending so much time stealing that they hadn't taken time to learn how to forecast, is essentially the matter. So we're faced with a situation where none of these guys, a few of the people only, really know what's coming on. It comes under the gauge of the situation now. The system is going to crash. It's going to crash soon. It's going to crash fast. I'm looking at September. For us, September is a very late date to be fooling around with this thing. So this is the kind of situation we're in. Virtually no one. Two things you can say about it. Either they don't know what they're talking about or what they're not talking about, or they're lying. And I think the numbers who think that the liars are probably a smaller fraction, but they're the ones who intend to survive. So what they will do essentially is are going to, with a bail-in as they call it, they're going to eliminate the assets that they can't cover for anymore. And this will mean that people will be starving to death. Throughout the United States, whole sections will be starving to death. So there is no satisfactory solution to this in any way with the Wall Street crowd and London. There's nothing we can do with them. There's nothing we want to do with them. They're going to crash. The problem is people are saying, well, I'm going to survive. But they're kidding themselves. They're not going to survive. the number of people and their amount that will be saved out of this bailout process, or the bail-in process, will be very few people. And most of the people who are supporting this swindle will be swindled too. There are going to be very few survivors when this system comes down. So the problem of forecasting is simple. I can forecast this thing in its present course of direction is going to crash. I expect it to crash during the course of the autumn months going into winter. And by the beginning of the year, you're going to see a crash beyond belief, unless we do something to change this. And that's where it stands. Most people are simply kidding themselves because they wish to believe. Others are just plain liars. But only a few people will actually come out of this thing alive. That's the intention. Remember, what's the motive behind this thing? Don't just try to beg. What is the motive behind this thing? The British Queen has made it very clear that her intention is for a prompt cutback in the population of the planet. Her intention is to take of the 7 billion people who were recently living as living persons on this planet, going to be reduced to less than 1 billion people rapidly. So now count your chances accordingly under that scheme. So what the Queen's demand is, we're going to reduce, according to her, we're going to reduce the population of the planet from 7 billion people to 1. And it's now in the direction of going less than 1, if we extrapolate this process. So the point is, if you're a patriot, your only option is to destroy this oligarchical system. So therefore you have to shut it down. Now, the question is then, what's the shutdown? Well, there's only one option we have. It's called Glass-Steagall. And under Glass-Steagall, under the policy which I've specified, which is Glass-Steagall, but you have to have certain specifications as to how this is going to work. And the way I have it, we will simply put the whole thing through reorganization. It means that we will wipe out the people behind the bail-in and bail-out and so forth. You just have to. They don't have any values. They've been going along with gambling, and never doing anything to secure that gambling. This money that they're supposed to assets have, they keep rolling them over, and there's no value in them. So therefore, in the logic of things, the Glass-Steagall will help us by we simply will foreclose on this process. If they have some value in some of these firms that's left after counting what they really still owe, we'll just cancel their obligations. They're out of date. And that will leave them pretty much stripped. Wall Street will not be around after that. But the answer is Glass-Steagall. Because with Glass-Steagall we do two things. First of all, we cancel all these debts that are fake. And now most of the inflation which you're experiencing in the United States and Europe is a result of an inflated value of worthless money. Now there may be some small amount of all that debt that has some intrinsic value, or could be claimed to have intrinsic value. Most of it is going to have to be wiped out. Either it will be wiped out voluntarily, or by law, or it will be wiped itself out because it cannot continue to survive, because the money is all fake. So that being taken into account, that is what we're faced with. Now, most people, unfortunately, including bankers generally, and a lot of accountants and general forecasters, really don't understand what this is all about. It's not that somebody's hiding it from them, it's they don't want to believe the truth. So what we would do simply is this. We would take and enact Glass-Steagall. What that would mean is we'd go to a new system. It's the same system that the nation was founded on. The first George Washington administration. Same policy as I'm talking about now. Which means that you give credit. You don't put out money and tell people to buy the money and then spend the money. What you do is you say, you give them credit. Now, the way it would work, for example, the way Alexander Hamilton approached it, what you would do, first of all, you would have a season, just to take a simplistic view of how this thing actually worked with him. You have a season. Now, the season will generally start with a year, which means that you're getting into the beginning of the year, which is the time you start to get into crops. So you have this period from Christmas on, New Year's on, until the crops begin to be planted and harvested, and the similar kinds of things done. And the farmer, in the meantime, is getting ready for the growth of the crops and whatever else is involved in this. Then, at that point, harvest time comes. And at harvest time, now the farmer's product is now on the market, and people are buying that product. So then we go into another phase where now we have the farmer has now become enriched, in a sense. So now we go to a next phase. How about the production, physical production, and so forth, and and also building of canals and things of that sort, which were essential for the economy. So that what we have is we denote the value of transactions in those terms as credit terms. And the credit of the farmer is then used to buy the goods of the machinist or the other trader. And it goes around in that circle. So that really you never are looking at money as such. You may use money as a way of denoting something, paper money, as a way of denoting an obligation. Who's got it, what's the score, so forth. But the actual foundation of this is, what are we producing and consuming? And what is the benefit of what we're consuming for us? So on that basis, what I would do, and probably will do if I ever get a chance to do this right now, is what we have to do right now. We have to put the whole thing through bankruptcy reorganization. And we do that simply by Glass-Steagall. The Glass-Steagall law carried out in the same design that Franklin Roosevelt did it the first time around. And that's the first thing we do. Now we have to go to now to increase the productivity of the labor force, which means we have to give not only more work, productive work, producing things that are needed, transportation, all kinds of things, but we must also increase the actual physical value in terms of production. More and better crops, more and better manufactures, more and better services, more and more canals, railways, things of that sort. So this whole process is a recycling of the process of productivity. And that's what we have to do. But what we have to do is get Glass-Steagall. The only thing that's worth doing right now in terms of policy is install Glass-Steagall according to the same principles that Franklin Roosevelt employed getting us out of the Depression. And that's the way to look at it. But because the idea that someone on the money side, money bags, can survive as a class, all those guys who are complaining that I might cause them to be robbed of what they want to steal are making a big mistake, because the best chance they've got, they come on our side. They're going to lose all that money that's worthless. But they will have a chance as human beings to get inside a system which will give them a security for times to come. We've got to realize that all this debate that you get on now is based on a false assumption that this is a combat of that we're going to take this money away from these guys. Well, it happens that the assets they're claiming to have as value have very little intrinsic value. What we're doing is we're paying inflation. We're paying for inflation without product. Our food supply has collapsed. It's been collapsed willfully under the two last administrations. The Bush administration was a killer. So was the Obama administration, has been a killer. So it's the destruction of the productive powers and resources of the United States under these presidents, which is the big problem. The problem begins, again, with the cancellation of Glass-Steagall. It was the cancellation of Glass-Steagall that created the problem. If they'd stuck to Glass-Steagall, we wouldn't have this mess. So the problem is entirely a product of inflation turning into hyperinflation under the Bush presidency and under Obama. Bush and Obama have destroyed the U.S. economy, essentially. The economy was still functioning as long as the Bush wasn't in power, was not in power. And that's the way it is. So that's our real problem. We have to get to the minds of the people out there, the minds of our people, an understanding of what the problem is, the nature of the problem, get rid of the foolish ideas which people talk about, and do the job. Okay, buddy, all you guys from Wall Street, you're bankrupt. You maybe have a little bit of value left in their systems, your gambling system, and we'll give you credit for that. But you're not going to take fake money and keep passing that around and inflating it without producing anything. And that's where we are. So the problem here is the problem of the public is the public doesn't understand this because there are very few competent economists in the United States. Actually competent economists. They are not really capable because they don't know what they're talking about. And we now got a generation, now if you look at the time that this whole process started, when this was canceled, when the Glass-Steagall system was canceled, most people today have lost track of what that used to be. They just don't understand it. And they believe in fantasies. And that's what's killing us. And if we don't, we have to do this as I prescribe. There is no other option for the people of the United States in particular. None. They need Glass-Steagall, and without it, the people of the United States, will not make it. So this is a question of life and death. We install Glass-Steagall, it's life. You reject Glass-Steagall, there's death. It's that simple. And all the arguments in between don't mean a damn thing.
Well, Lynn, several questions have come in related to Glass-Steagall and economics, so it's difficult to choose which to go with. But I want to, given what you just discussed, I want to follow up with a question on parity and economics in the reinstated Glass-Steagall world. This question comes from Dave Christie, a member of the policy committee who is in Eastern Washington working with a number of farmers and agriculturalists out there. And he said that farmers are obviously no fans of Wall Street, by and large, and that they feel that they're no longer working to produce food, but that they're working to produce a profit, that they're working for banks. He says they feel as though the culture has been taken out of agriculture, and it's now an agribusiness. Now, parity is a simple concept that farmers receive a price for their product that pays for the investment they have to make into producing it, as well as for the necessity of the upshifts that are needed for the future. So, since parity is becoming a more difficult concept for people to understand nowadays, he's asking, when Wall Street gets wiped out with the new Glass-Steagall, and many of these inflated values come down as that occurs, how do we establish a new sense of value? From a study of your economic theory, it is clear that true value lies in increasing power, measured from the standpoint of energy flux density. But in terms of setting a relatively fair pricing system, it would be good to start with a very crucial point of production, namely food. That might be a good starting point to reconfigure a sense of value. So the question is, would parity have a role in determining a new sense of value when Wall Street's paper is dissolved after Glass-Steagall is brought back?
This requires a little bit more explanation, which I was trying to hold back away from at this point. All right. The question of value. What we do. Well, let's put it this way. What's the difference between man and a monkey? Man and a baboon? Man and an ape? What's the difference? Well, the monkey, the man eats, and so forth. The man actually uses fire. The difference between man and an ape is fire, the use of fire. Now, somewhere way deep in Africa, which is our best information on this sort of thing, there were people, monkeys or baboons or gorilla-like creatures, ape-like creatures, and they were living there. But then you had a similar kind of culture at first glance, what you see from the remains of these places, and you find that man uses fire. Mankind is the only animal that uses fire. There's more to it than that, because the history of mankind is we start with simple fire, which is the way civilization begins, and it goes through various stages of development to higher and higher levels of skill. It can be generally expressed in terms of power, energy, fire. The fire gets hotter and hotter per capita as you go along, which is that mankind progresses. Mankind, who is simply an ape or an ape-like creature in South Africa, at one point now becomes several orders of magnitude something new, something fresh, creative, builds systems. Generally, the increase in the intensity of fire as a part of the whole business of human existence is crucial. Now, what has happened now is that up until the time of the assassination of our great president, that up to that point, we in the United States had, with ebbs and flows, we had periods, bad periods, where the people were oppressed, exploited, and so forth, and times when we were actually productive, and the productive periods were significant. So what has happened, we have, as humanity has with ebbs and starts, that we have either slowed down and become backward, or we have increased our technology, we've increased our intellectual powers, and so forth. And the United States actually saved civilization, because what was done by the landing of the Pilgrims in Massachusetts, for example, was crucial, because what happened, this forced the development of Massachusetts, for example, forced the development of economy in North America. Whereas in Europe at that time, the pressure was on to keep suppressing the population. In other words, people would become richer, relatively speaking, and then someone would say, this is no good. These guys we're eating too much, there are too many of them, and so forth. We have to cut the population, we've got to cut their standard of living. And this was the characteristic of man's life in old Europe. What happened with the Columbus voyage, which was organized by Nicholas of Cusa, who was the genius who designed this whole system, he recognized that there had been this recurrent pattern of degeneration of European civilization, for example, as well as other parts of the world, and recognized that there were cycles which are based on the oligarchical system, because it was a system in which the majority of the population was kept in virtual semi-slavery, and a few people who were the so-called wealthy and powerful dominated the scene. And the Roman Empire, for example, it became a monster of power, and then it suddenly was collapsed. And the Roman oligarchy got up there to the north end of the Adriatic Sea, living in a mud pile for a while, and gradually came back but they were the original Roman imperial class. Same thing happened again and again in the history of Europe in particular. And therefore we have a pattern, which was not only, it happened in the Far East as well. You had complete wipeouts of cultures through collapse processes because the oligarchy was opposing the increase of the standard of living. They wanted fewer people all the time. They wanted to build up something as a power then that would get too wealthy. People would get a sense of strength, challenge the oligarchy. And so, like as with the Roman Empire's collapse, the empire would collapse for a while. And then a new empire would come out. Now what happened was that Cusa, who was well informed on this, said this is the solution is that we've got to take people from Europe and have them move away from Europe across the great oceans and build up a new civilization to re-inspire, not only for one time more, but as a continuing process to a more productive human species and a better society. So what happened was that the landings in North America, in particular, there were attempts in South and Central America, but they didn't work out so much because the Spanish system, which was a dominant one, had made a mess of things. But so we understood that. We understood what this was. And because we, especially in the area of Massachusetts and joining areas, we set into motion a higher standard of productivity than had been known before. You take the Massachusetts Bay Colony, when it went into its great phase of growth. The economy, the economics and technology of the Massachusetts Bay Colony was superior to that of Europe. So the fact that we had this tension between the Americas and Europe on this particular account meant that Europe was out to try to crush the North American civilization in particular. And the North American civilization was fighting back. But the fact is that the effectiveness of the fact that the more intelligent people, effectively intelligent people, would tend to be in the Americas. You'd have a similar kind of thing in Canada. And you'd have similar developments like echoing this in South and Central America. And the problem was always the European powers, which represented, well, usually about 40% or 50% of the wealth of the world and the people of the world, that they were always fighting back to try to crush this American development. And the fights were always, for example, the first thing the British did, actually the British were actually Dutch, and it was the Dutch bums who invaded England and brought their system, they called the British system, into existence in the British Isles as well. So you had this fight with the imperialist part in Europe as opposed to the productive part of those nations in the Americas. So all the way through, there had been a fight between, on the one side, the American and similar kinds of things, like countries in South America and so forth, that developed. And they were developed in contrast, in competition with the European oligarchical system. And then you had people in Europe, such as Bismarck, for example, in the course of the 19th century, who were actually fighting for the same purpose. So you had a tension inside Europe. You had people on the European side who wanted the same things that the Americans did, for example. And so therefore the point was the British Empire had a problem, which is the original Dutch Empire already. And so therefore the intention was to crush this American and similar kinds of developments in the transatlantic region. And we are now at the tail end of an attempt to crush out of existence, what the Americas has represented, crush it out of existence, and use the crushing of the America to impoverish and do the same kind of dirties to the European population. And Wall Street is the expression. Now, Wall Street was a creation brought into the United States even earlier than the United States was formed. was brought into North America. And these bankers, who were British bankers, controlled the area of New York City, for example, controlled the Boston bankers, controlled other things. And so these parasites from the inside would often, the British interest and these parasites would create presidents. The presidents were scumbags, to use a polite term. Their intentions were evil. And this happened recurrently. Then we would have presidents and governments in the United States which were of our liking, of our tradition. But you had at the same time, coming in from Europe, you had these swarms of parasites, evil parasites who were out to gobble us up. And what happened is, with the assassination of John Kennedy, that the turn in the United States has gone down permanently ever since. The assassination of Kennedy was the fulcrum for bringing the United States into destruction. The next crucial turn from that point on was what happened when Bill Clinton made a mistake, and which he would probably tell you today it was a mistake, of canceling Glass-Steagall. And the cancellation of Glass-Steagall and the process leading into that cancellation, as we went down, every step we went down. We in the United States, from the time that Kennedy died, we went down. Everything became worse. And that's why Kennedy was killed, because he was an obstacle to the British policy. And as long as he kept his policy going, the Americans were going to win. So they assassinated him. Then they assassinated his brother. And in the meantime, they started a war which Kennedy would not have allowed and others would not have allowed. A war in Indochina. There was no reason for allowing that war in Indochina to have happened. None. But this is how we were undermined and destroyed. And the worst of it was the minds of our own people were destroyed. Because being our own people and considering themselves as underdogs and showing respect for the overdogs or whatever else they were, this is what happened to us. And so therefore our struggle now is to get our republic back. That's simple. We are going to take our republic back and kick these bums out of there. We're going to have our nation back again. And that's what this is all about. The other side of the thing is, how do we do it? Well, simply, humanity has always depended on scientific progress, or whatever scientific progress means. That's been the basis for the progress of the human species since from the beginning. Since the time in South Africa that somebody was using fire to cook their food rather than raw. And that's been the fight all the way through ancient times. And the same thing is true today. We don't have to worry about some things that other people would like to make problems. All we have to do is get back to our American tradition. Our technology, increased energy flux density, from step to step to step, always march upward. We're going next to the stage of thermonuclear fusion, because we cannot manage the problems of the planet without introducing the factor of thermonuclear fusion. The green policy is a policy of mass murder by suggestion. By telling people it's good to be green, they're committing murder against their own people, because the effect of going green is to mass murder of our population. And our job here is to get our nation back, our republic back, according to our Constitution, original Constitution, which is perfectly fine today. It has features now, which technology has changed, and features of what it was before have been outmoded. But they're still the same principle. The principle is that man, starting from a fire user in South Africa, cooking his food, had made a revolution. And instead of having animals, we had human beings. Animals might have liked to do what we do, but they didn't come with the equipment to do it. The way we do that is we help the animals, either because we like their companionship or because they're important to us for our food and so forth, and other reasons. And so that is the story that has to be told. The usual explanation, the wise guy who comes along with a couple of quick explanations, is a fool. Most people are fools, not because they intend to be fools, but because they're encouraged to be foolish by believing in this and believing in that, which are all fakery, all fraud. And that's where the issue lies. And therefore, my concern, I have a clear conception of what this Glass-Steagall means. It's no different. What I believe is no different from what Franklin Roosevelt believed. It's no different than what the founders of the nation believed. But the point is, that is us. We are not going to sell ourselves out again. This is our system. It's a system we created, or our predecessors created, in creating what became known as the American system, which is the greatest system ever invented on this planet, right? At least for modern times. But it's been struggling against something at its throat. Well, we call it the British Empire. It's actually the Dutch Empire, but the name doesn't make that much. And the time has come to get those bastards off our back and get back to rebuilding the nation which we fought for, which we tried to build, and which is ours. And it's ours not to be a predator on the rest of the species, but to give to other people the sense of the same kind of freedom and the same time of progress that we want. And that's the way to explain this thing, not all the gibberish put at one side. What's necessary is you have to have the know-how to make this work. Well, I have the know-how. And we have other people in this country who have the know-how. We just got to pull ourselves together and make sure that this country gets the benefit, that benefit now, because it's too late for us to fool around with this anymore.
Okay. Well, on the subject of those dogs who would wish to piss out man's fire, we have a question about Saudi Arabia. So coming up to the 12th anniversary of September 11th, 2001, attacks on the Pentagon and the World Trade Center, there are new revelations of a further cover-up of the crimes. Through a Freedom of Information Act suit, a local Florida newspaper, the Broward Bulldog, has confirmed that the Tampa FBI field office has 15,000 documents on 9/11, and it appears those investigative files were withheld from the Joint Congressional Inquiry. The chair of that inquiry, former Senator Bob Graham, along with Representative Walter Jones, is demanding that the government declassify the 28-page chapter of the final report detailing the role of the Saudi kingdom, and specifically of Prince Bandar bin Sultan in the financing of 9/11. Mr. LaRouche, you have placed an enormous public spotlight on the 28 pages of the 9/11 issue. Where does this issue stand? Why is it so important and timely now? And what must happen?
Well, the question has to be formulated properly, and then you begin to get the answers tumbling out of the closet. First of all, there are three entities involved in 9/11. One is the British monarchy. Number two is the BAE, a military production capability resource. The third is the Saudi kingdom. What we do know that the pilots, for example, who flew into the Twin Towers were Saudi agents under the direction of the ambassador to the United States of Saudi Arabia. So that despite the fact of all his secret documents and so forth, there are certain simple facts which are known. And the facts are that this was a British operation with a Saudi slug involved, and with this BAE corporation, which was produced the military, most of that material used for that operation. We have the facts are known. Those facts are known. All you have to do, instead of looking for some mysterious reading of some document, you don't need to know some secret document or some that's been made secret. Where did the equipment come from? And who were the people who delivered it? Who were the people who were Saudi pilots working under the direction of the ambassador to the United States from Saudi Arabia, who's still a leading honcho in Saudi Arabia? And that's how the thing was done. The names of the pilots, the identities of the pilots who flew into the Twin Towers is known. And there are people who under oath are not allowed to say what they know in terms of so-called details. I don't go by the details, I go by the facts. The details can often fool you. The facts are where did the equipment come from? How much did it cost? Who was supplying the government? See, the problem was that you had a long period of Saudi oil and British schemes, and that's how it worked. So they had they built up a military capability with the British make British pilots, Saudi pilots, and this corporate structure. And the whole thing was done by oil speculation, done from Saudi Arabia, but done in the North Sea with trading petroleum and reselling it in this area. This created the BOE resources, and this is what made it possible to pull these things together. And there are other things which I won't speak about, which I do know. Something about what families from the United States were involved in this operation. That's the truth of the matter. And there's no doubt about it. There are many people who do know about this, but they're hushed up because they want to refer to documents. They want to refer to specific evidence. Yeah, but the point is there was something going on here. What about that North Sea oil business, where the British and the BOE and the Saudis were running a swindle out there? Where'd the money come from for this operation? It came from these sources. And it came from the complicity of some Americans, from families that are fairly significant and have a fairly long record of affinity to the Saudis, the British, and to the Saudis. The same people, like Prescott Bush, for example, is one of those types. He was the guy who funded Hitler into power. He was a part of a company, a whole assortment of people who were part of the same system. What the problem is in the United States is not secret. Some people have documented evidence which is secret. It's been made secret. And that is an obstacle. That secrecy is an obstacle to the truth being made apparent to the whole U.S. population. But every American has a right to know these things. And the fact that that Bush, young Bush, George W. Bush, and Obama both played this game of cover-up is simply part of the same picture.
On that front, recent developments on the Stasi police state-style front show that this is really the end of the road, and the oligarchy is going for very direct dictatorial measures at this point. Recent examples: the detention of Glenn Greenwald's partner David Miranda at the Heathrow Airport under a provision of the 2000 Terrorism Act, and the thuggish tactics employed by top levels of the British government who forced the London Guardian, to destroy hard drives in their basement under the supervision of Britain's GCHQ. Those are examples. Take Obama's ridiculous NSA review committee, including Director of National Intelligence Clapper, and then Cass Sunstein, of all people. So this, as you said in I think it was last week's webcast, this brutish British intimidation relies on people giving in to that intimidation. Can they get away with this?
Well, that depends. As I say, you have to use your mental resources sometimes on these problems. You have to sometimes go at an indirect approach to something is too secret, too sensitive. Find the other way to approach the same subject matter. Find the construct that does the same thing for you. Now, there's some people who know this, but they know these facts, which would be sufficient for them to speak out. But the problem is, even though their knowledge is right, and it should be free for them to present in the interests of the American people, the point is what they've made a construct of saying 38 pages cannot be touched. So therefore, as long as you accept that as being a limitation you will submit to, you are crippled in dealing with this thing. I go at this thing from a different standpoint. Naturally, I know a lot of things about this whole business. I've been involved in the investigation of this, even before the 9/11 event occurred. It was on the 3rd of January of that year that I warned former President Clinton that this was going to happen this year. And I did, extensive investigations of where is this going to come from, who's going to do it, so forth. I was in the middle of that. I was very close to getting to the facts. I didn't have these facts. I didn't have the knowledge of what the Saudis had done, what a certain bank that was collapsed in Washington had to do with all this. Because that bank that was shut down was a bank that was involved in funding, the conduit of the funding of some of this stuff. So we have the other sources. We know what the circumstances was. And sometimes trying to find a document with a signature on it is sometimes a mistake. Because the guy who's the perpetrator will find some way to prevent you from quoting the document or getting this special information. But, society has an organization to it. If you're looking for little leak secrets, you may not do anything of any importance. But if you use your head and look at society as a process and say, here's where the water is flowing. Where is the water coming from? You don't have to get a document that has the water confessing. You simply have to know that the water is flowing, and you know where it's flowing from, and you know where it's flowing to. So sometimes that kind of investigation, which I like to use, because I don't like the gossip version. I like the nice deductive version of investigation.
All right, well, this will be the last question then for tonight. Let me preface this with quoting from that Russian-Ukrainian naturalist Vladimir Vernadsky. In 1925, Vernadsky, then living in France, wrote the following. He said, "Man is profoundly distinguished from the other organisms by his action on the environment. This distinction, which was great from the very beginning, has become immense with the passage of time. The action of other organisms is almost exclusively determined by their nutrition and their physical growth and increase. Mankind certainly acts in the same way as all of these organisms, but his mass is completely negligible in comparison with the totality of living matter, and the direct manifestation in living nature of his nutrition and physical increase are almost nothing. Reason changes all. Through it, man utilizes material in the environment, inanimate or living, not only for the building of his body, as other life does, but also for social life. And this usage has become a great geological force. Thought, by its existence, introduces into the earth a powerful process having no analog before the appearance of man." So this writing in 1925, this is the beginning of the noosphere, the understanding, at least him putting it down in writing, the understanding from a geological standpoint of the action of human thought on our planet. And that's the subject for this final question to you. Currently, as you know, our scientific research team, the Basement, is currently developing a powerful reworking of the North American Water and Power Alliance, a project originally proposed in the 1960s to bring water from Alaska and Canada into the parched Southwest and northern Mexico. Our re-envisioning of NWAPA includes the use of nuclear power, which would nearly double the amount of water available for distribution, a better understanding of atmospheric water flows to comprehend the recycling of water through living processes, and the potential of weather control systems to distribute atmospheric moisture in the best possible way. Viewed in this light, NWAPA leads in the development of more than an economic recovery. It kickstarts a whole new economy. The upcoming report we're working on states that our economic troubles cannot be solved by slow means, but by a major leap towards thermonuclear fusion. To many economists, embarking on such a huge project at a time of economic distress might seem counterintuitive. What's wrong with their thinking?
Well, their cowardice has run ahead of their brains. No, this is the truth. I mean, I've been living for a number of years, and in the course of my living, I've had some experiences, especially as I entered into adulthood more particularly, and became a consultant in terms of forecasting, economic forecasting. I became one of the most successful economic forecasts in the period. But we say, well, how does that happen? Well, it's a natural thing that the human being has the potential inherently, if it's developed properly, to be able to actually foresee the future. Now, this is not some miracle where somebody comes in with a magic wand and does a trick for you. It's based on your ability to actually think through, on the basis of your exposure to society, to think through where society is going. You have all these elements around that you can consider. And it shows you where society is going to tend to go. Because you have an experience of mankind. Mankind is not an unknown quantity. It may be for some people. But for those of us who are serious, it is not an unknown quantity. So you just have to piece your thoughts together and look ahead and go through some experience of experimenting. How can I adduce from this set of facts that is going to happen? Nothing magical about it. But the problem, most people are trained and conditioned to limit themselves to what they have experienced up to this moment. Forecasting means, if it's competent, means you are able to foresee what you could not have experienced at that moment. Because you get an understanding of the process of humanity. All kinds of life and so forth. The very life itself gives it to you. The very experience of how life works. And what you have is you don't have little pieces of clues. What you have is a composite of the way things come together, the way they work together. And you look at certain disturbances that are going on in this process. You find what is causing that disturbance. Why doesn't it work the way it should work? So you get this combination. I mean, it's like my most successful one was in the summer, but actually in December 2nd of that year, when I had this great debate on this question of forecasting. And I had the pleasure of wiping these guys out in that debate. But it's the same kind of thing. You have a certain knowledge from experience and from insight as to how things work. And you can, instead of just saying, here's a little thing, is it going to do this or is it going to do that? No, that's not your answer. The answer is, do you understand your society well enough to understand what this combination of symptoms is leading you to? And then something clicks in your mind. That's how it works. And then you can make a fairly precise forecast. And that is what has been lacking because it's discouraged. Because of the banking system, the way the banking system is developed. These guys are freaks. Most accountants are freaks. Not freaks in accounting, but they're freaks when they try to apply counting as they understand it as being a substitute for knowing the future. Now, for example, knowing the future, what do you mean by knowing the future? We take the most important kind of fact. The most important kind of fact is knowing progress, is knowing the principles of progress, of knowing the kinds of development which have opened the gates to a completely new understanding of society and civilization, which tell you that this is not going to work and therefore that's bad. But if you cannot do what we must do with the population now, we must free the population from the so-called practical minds. People who are practical are useless when it comes to these matters because they're mechanical. Their thinking is mechanical. It's not productive, not creative. And the person who wants to become something should wish to become creative. And creative means the ability to adduce from the experience that you have, both as your own experience and what you know of people's experience from the past. The more you know about history as it pertains to determining how things work, the better off you're informed. I happen to be well informed because of this stuff. There are other people who, like me. We are each in our own way. We develop this kind of ability to forecast. There's nothing mysterious about it for us. It's fascinating for us. I enjoy this thing. I enjoy discoveries for their own sake. The fact that you can now see something and discover something you couldn't understand before. And then you get to the point that you have a certain ability of certainty, that you know this is right. You know this is what the problem is. If it's not perfect, if you don't have a perfect assumption, well, here are the parameters. It's either this or this or this. And that's the way it's done. But the problem is, in our university programs, we have gone more and more, it's even in the secondary schools, children also. We miseducate our children and our adolescents and our adults. We get them to learn rules, which means they're trying to learn the rules that are given to them and trying to hope that those rules given to them, if they accept them, are going to give them some kind of reward. And the fact is, the person who's going to discover is the person who does not obey the rules. It does not obey the given rules, but is trying to find for themselves what the components that lead to a future might be. And if you can do that and train yourself to do that from childhood, or if you have the gift of parents or something who do help you do that kind of experience, then you actually are able to think the future before it happens. Not to forecast the future, not to predict, but to think the future. I would never dare, I'd never make myself foolish enough to pretend that I had a guess, that I had a gimmick. If I don't know it, and if I don't know it on good grounds, I don't say I know it. I don't. And actually, there are a limited number of times that I've done things of that sort, of that significance. But they've always worked. And as I got older, I became better at it, though a little bit slower.
Okay, well, this brings our webcast for this evening to a close. I'd like to thank Mr. Lyndon LaRouche for joining us this evening. And I would encourage all of our audience to go to our website, look for the reports that Jason was discussing, give your money some value, and actually contribute it to us so that we can put it to work for the greater good of mankind. And in the meantime, you'll also find on the website orders, directions about where you can go over the course of the next 2 weeks to intervene on your congressman, to create that necessary pressure for them to move with the Glass-Steagall, so that when they come back into session in 2 weeks, they know exactly what the population wants. The fire's been lit under their butt, and they'll do as is necessary and as is demanded. So you can find information on where to find your congressman or woman on our website. And so we encourage people to do that, go out, get to work, and we thank you for joining us.